We've got something pretty cool for you. I'm going to bring up stage Eugene Liderman. Eugene reports into the office of our CTO. And this is one of those great examples of, I'm really glad he's on our side. Eugene often demos the various insecurities of mobile environments and whatnot, and helps us understand kind of the things that we're up against. So with that, let me welcome Eugene up here. And I'm going to, yeah, come on up. And I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask him that can hopefully help us benefit from Eugene's knowledge and experience with mobile security. I'm going to move my stool a little bit here.
A little close.
So, a little close. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about mobile security?
Misconceptions, can you hear me now? Misconceptions around mobile security. Well, you know, I want to categorize that in two buckets. So there's the people that think mobile security, mobile devices, smartphones have enough security built into it, that, you know, it's good enough, who are quickly proven wrong based on certain things, which I'll cover. And then there's the people that say, well, I want to reproduce mobile security the way I do desktop security. So I want to put on VPN, firewall, antivirus, intrusion protection, intrusion detection, at which point the phone doesn't really work. And half those things don't exist for mobile today anyways. So, you know, but specifically on mobile security, the big issue is that, you know, there's certain things that your device, like John mentioned earlier, that it stores. And when we show demos around, you know, content, so the data synchronized from back end to the device, data stored on the device, data used on the device, you know, your credentials, so the concept of the keychain on iOS, where, you know, every website you go to gives you that nice option to save the password. That password is forensically recoverable. You know, your mail client, that password is recoverable. Any authentication certs on the device, private keys, VPN certificates, recoverable. So, you know, when we show these demos to people, it's kind of an enlightening experience because nobody ever brings these up, and I almost feel guilty doing these demos sometimes because some of these demonstrations are like 5 years old. They've been around forever. But for some reason, analysts never get to see them from other vendors because they just don't solve those problems. They never, you know, mitigate those risks.
Just to be clear, what do you mean by these items are recoverable?
Oh, yeah. So, you know, basically, they're, for iOS as an example, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, you need to jailbreak the device before you really get access to some of this data. But the reality is that, you know, most, when you have mobile device management solutions on there, what they'll end up doing is they'll put a complex password because, you know, to your point earlier, they're going to rely on the full disk encryption. So the way the full disk encryption works is it's derived off that password. And, you know, it's going to basically, once the password is entered, everything's unlocked. When it's not entered, everything's locked. And so what ends up happening is to appease the user experience of having a 8-character complex password, they'll give the user an average of like a 15-minute timeout window. So if anybody swipes a phone within that 15-minute timeout window, not only is that person going to have access to what's visibly available on the device, it would take very little to actually take that phone, plug it in, and even using commercial tools, forget about security tools or forensics tools. You know, when I demonstrate this, I use a utility to just back up text messages and pictures. And, you know, go through the file system, look for remnants of configuration data that will point, here's the VPN concentrator URL, here's your mail server information, or then run something more sophisticated, pull actual, like the keychain off the device, and forget the data on the device. At that point, if I have your logon information, I have your configuration information, I can just go and connect to your VPN. You know, I now know your access point password, so if I'm just browsing around the building or have access, and amazingly here, you guys are very lax on security. When I walked into some of the buildings, you know, I had my ID ready, I had my belt off to go through the metal detector. You know, I was ready to go, and they're just, no, go ahead and go right through. So, you know, and those combinations of things potentially could expose a lot of data out there.
So we used to joke in California, there was the famous incident not too long ago, I think it was in the fall of last year, where an Apple engineer supposedly left a confidential new device under development in a bar. And I can't tell you how many people used to tell us, well, but, you know, I don't leave my devices in bars. In fact, you know, my device never leaves my side. And, you know, I have now realized, unfortunately, through knowing Eugene, it's like, well, let's think about that for a second. So you're a business traveler, sure. And you go to airports, sure. And you're probably on your mobile device because the lines are so long. So you're on your mobile device right up until the point they tell you put everything in the little tub and put it through the conveyor. I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, at that point, the device is no longer in your control. I'm like, yeah, but someone would need the device for a long time. He's like, no. What did it take you, 30 seconds?
Less than a minute. I need the device for 1 minute physical possession, and I will recover everything I need for offline later on.
And so what that means is you get your device back, everything continues to work as you would expect it to work, but he's now got a clone of it, and he's got the keys to the kingdom. It's the moral equivalent of giving somebody not only the key to your home, but giving them your address and what hours you're not going to be there as well. I mean, it really is that important.
Well, and one thing to point out, I am not a security researcher by trade. I'm actually more of a pretty face. Just kidding. But I Googled everything I've learned. I attribute to Googling it. So I mean, I didn't go through any forensics classes or anything. It was just what was available on YouTube and Google to do some of this stuff. So if I can do it, you all can do it as well.
Okay, so I had mentioned Heartbleed earlier. How much of this was media blowing this out of proportion? How much of this is no? This is real. This is important.
So I think with Heartbleed, once the media blew it up, people like me went to Google and started looking at ways to exploit it and scare people. And so part of it is, I mean, when the masses didn't know, it might have not impacted everybody so badly. But once people found out about it, the people that don't, the security researchers out there that are learning this stuff, they're going to try to report this information. But there's other people that once they find out about it and they're focused on it, there's so many tools out there to take advantage of it. That's when you start getting nervous. And so the real important thing about Heartbleed and things like GoToFail and all the VPN exploits on Android that recently came out, it's that agility in remediating that issue. So with Heartbleed, everybody said, well, change your passwords. Well, that's not necessarily going to be the best thing, because until the systems got updated, you can change your passwords every single time, again and again and again and again. The vulnerability was still there. And so the point there is that at least with iOS, Apple patched GoToFail relatively quickly. Of course, it's up to the user to install that new update. It was 706. But on Android, here's the dilemma. So a lot of these Android devices are using the version of OpenSSL that has the issue with Heartbleed. And so what happens then? Google's got to issue a patch. They got to then send it to the device manufacturer. They got to certify it. They got to send it to the carrier. They got to certify it. And then it comes out to the user 6 months later. So what are you going to do in those 6 months? And so I think the agility around trying to mitigate this stuff is a really important thing. And obviously, not shameless plug, but the containerized approach obviously does solve that, because you don't have to rely on those same things. It's using a true container uses its own crypto. It doesn't rely on the OS level security, right? So.
But again, actually going to your shameless plug, I mean, we still have to worry about what libraries we use in our own implementations, as well as our ISV partners. And
absolutely.
I mean, no one's immune, quote unquote.
No one's immune, but we can roll it out so much faster. I mean, we had a patch out for the limited impact that we did have. We had a patch out very quickly. And
so on Android, because oftentimes the device manufacturers actually make modifications to the OS, every device isn't necessarily upgradable.
Exactly.
So this is a case where until such a time your vendor makes that available, you might not ever be able to be safe.
That's absolutely true as well.
That's comforting. Okay. What did we see in terms of how companies responded? How did folks in the industry respond to this? I mean, did we learn anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing is a lot more. At least I focus a lot in public sector, and a lot more agencies are more looking at this proactively, monitoring and trying to look at the security community, looking at Twitter feeds, looking at US CERT issued vulnerabilities, so that they can be faster to try to reach out to their vendor community. I saw so many customers reach out to us asking, how do we get impacted? How can we work with them if they have any questions? So it was definitely, it created a better dialogue between the vendor community and the customer community. This whole thing.
The cryptography, crypto security has a long history of being open. There's no such thing as a cryptographic algorithm that is private and trusted. They're all published for researchers to look at and try and break and find vulnerabilities in. What I thought was interesting about Heartbleed is watching the industry's response to end users, seeing who proactively reached out and started communicating right away about whether or not you needed to worry. And candidly, I mean, I haven't seen a vulnerability in a long time that affected this much of the entire industry. It was very interesting to see. And I guess what I'd encourage you to do is, regardless of what vendors you work with, working with vendors where you can actually have that dialogue, where you have access to them, where there's a two-way conversation about what your implementation looks like, what products you're using, is just so important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what users should have learned from this?
Users are my favorite topic because, like any security professional, everybody says, no matter what your security strategy is, the user is always the weakest link. And, I think from a user perspective, recognizing that, because it's usually the users that are saying, oh, my phone is good enough, native, everything, the security built into the OS is the best. And my best analogy on this, and I was telling John the story earlier, when I was learning all the forensic stuff that I've learned, I had to have like a live target. So I picked my wife, right? And no, I'm not a paranoid husband or anything, because people always think that. But I needed somebody to test with. So the first time I was trying to figure out how to forensically recover her data, then I tried to do a man in the middle, and I hacked her Facebook and all this good stuff. And I posted something like, I love my husband, and she immediately commented, I've been hacked. But yeah, don't judge me. But the point is now, my wife actually has a more secure, like a more stringent password than I do. She barely uses Wi-Fi at Starbucks or anywhere else. I mean, she became really security conscious. And I think the whole thing about Heartbleed, it was a real wake-up call to the consumer user base out there saying, you know what, when we do banking, when we do all this consumer stuff at these locations, maybe we should think twice. And maybe we do need to start having multiple sets of passwords. When John mentioned that story about different categories of passwords, that's me. I have my social network passwords, my bank passwords, and passwords I just don't care about too much. And so I think users, if they tend to their personal data in a way where they become more security conscious, they're going to treat enterprise data the same way, because it's just they understand now. They're not oblivious to all this stuff that's happening.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things is I often see our customers and people we work with say you have to have a long or complex password. We see that all the time. What was missing from that dialogue, which I'm now seeing more of, thank God, is long password's great, except when it's the same long password for everything you access. So again, having access to different credentials for different resources is clearly important.